Lord Stern hopes for this conference. There have been many in the past over the years, and promises made, promises broken. Will this time be different?
Yes, it will. The world has been working for the last 3 years to put this one in place. It's well prepared. Around 180 countries have put in their intentions for 2030. Under no compulsion to do so. They've put them in because they want to. Something like 140 leaders are arriving in Paris today and will be all speaking tomorrow. There's a much bigger commitment, much greater togetherness this time than there was 6 years ago in Copenhagen.
There's this key question, isn't there? Well, I know we've talked about this before, and it is of oversight, enforcement, and potentially sanctions. This isn't even going to be a treaty. Who will say to country X or country Y in 15 years' time, you haven't carried out those policies, you haven't brought in those restrictions on carbon emissions, now you must be punished? It's never going to happen.
And that's not the way to get things done. You're not going to get a police force from Mars or a court from Venus enforcing these kinds of things, and it wouldn't be very smart to think that you could. Countries are doing this because they think that there's great advantage in growing much more cleanly, getting rid of air pollution in a much more attractive environment. They're doing it because they think it's attractive, and they're doing it because they think they should do it, because collectively to destroy the environment for our children and grandchildren would not be something that's right to do. And more people see that.
We can't leave the politics out of it, although, can we, here? This is not, we understand, going to be turned into a legally binding treaty because of the objections, plenty of nations, but leading them, the United States. They don't want to be bound by that kind of agreement.
It will be an international agreement on the processes for submitting and reviewing and measuring the emissions, and for exchange of ideas on how to intensify that process. That part will be an international agreement, and that will be legally binding in the sense that any international agreement is. They can't call it a treaty or a protocol because that would need Senate approval. But they won't call it that. They'll call it an agreement, and it does not need Senate approval. And the world is clearly understanding of this issue. It's been on the agenda for a long time. It's been thought through.
Well, I mean, in the politics of it all, were you happy with the process, which, in effect, some people have described it as setting your own homework? This idea that countries brought to the table what they could do, rather than overall recommendations that, well, you emit this amount of CO2 and you must cut by this amount.
What's remarkable is they have done their own homework, and it's a good deal less than anything like business as usual. Countries want to do this, and they want to do it together. We have to find a way. It won't always be easy. Currently, the sum total of the results of their homework in terms of planned emissions for 2030 are too high for 2 degrees, but they're much lower than business as usual. And of course, on the agenda is how you work to bring those intentions for 2030 down, through a lot of it through innovation, a lot of it through better policies, and it will be a story of much more attractive growth.
But it's also a story, isn't it? I was talking to Sir David Attenborough about this a little bit earlier today. I mean, it's a story about billions and billions and billions of dollars, pounds, or however we want to term it, because we do. The developed world has to compensate those in the developing world, do they not, to follow the same path we're doing without the size of the economy we've got.
Now, that's the wrong language and the wrong understanding. It's right that there will have to be a lot of investment, but that will be investment with tremendously attractive returns, including in cutting air pollution, including in energy efficiency, as well as reducing carbon emissions. So it's not a question of compensation, but it is a question of sharing new technologies, investing together in new technologies, and working together in a rather distorted world capital market to bring down the capital cost, bring down the cost of capital, and that's very important.
But let's look at a specific example.
That's mutual support, Dermot. That's not compensation.
OK, but I mean, it's a transfer of wealth. I mean, you may call it investment. I mean, I want to look at the specific...
No, it's not a transfer of wealth. You got that wrong also, Dermot.
Well, the specific example of India, for instance,
yes.
Huge growing economy, millions upon millions of people there don't even have access to electricity. Naturally, their administration, their state wants to supply that. And the main means by which it's doing that is building coal-fired power stations. What do we say to India as we move away from coal? What do we say to India about that, and how do we help them?
That's the right kind of question now. India will be building in the next 7 or 8 years capacity for solar energy in its country about the same as we've got in the world today, total. India's going very strongly for solar. At the same time...
But it's also building dozens, at least, of coal-fired power stations.
I was about to finish my sentence. It is also building a lot of coal-fired power stations, Dermot. And the challenge will be to move forward with technical progress so that those coal-fired power stations don't compete very much longer with renewable energy. And partly that will be technical progress in the renewables. It's moving very fast, but we ought to be investing as the rich world very strongly to bring that cost down. And we have to remember...
So we pay for that?
We all invest. China will be investing a lot in... by the way, China's peaked coal already. Nigel Farage, as usual, got all this stuff completely wrong in your earlier thing. You should talk to him about something else. He didn't know about this stuff.
It would have been good to have you both on together.
China has already peaked its coal. China's working on its 13th five-year plan. It's just finishing its 12th. They're moving very strongly in a much better direction. We, working together as a world, must find better ways of doing things and share them. And that's what's beginning to happen, Dermot.